Turn with me, if you would, to Genesis 28, and we'll just have a look at some of those verses together. I think it's always amazing, isn't it, how people have inspiration or dreams. You know, I read a story about a guy called Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. He was a doctor, and it was a long, long time ago, and he wanted to find out the effects of ether. And so he spoke to one or two patients after they'd been given the ether, and then he thought, the only way I can really find out is take some ether myself. So he dosed himself up with some ether to knock himself out. And just as he was going to sleep, he suddenly had this flash of inspiration. And he felt that he could suddenly grasp the key to all of the mysteries in the universe. Well, when he woke up, he thought, that's it, I've got to record this. But he couldn't actually quite get it, you know. So he arranged for someone to sit by him and a proper test and everything else, and they were going to write down everything that he said. And the time came, and they gave him some ether, and sure as eggs is eggs, he started going under, and he had that flash of inspiration again, and he said the words. And he knew in his mind, I can now go to sleep because I've got the key to the universe. Well, when he woke up, he turned round and looked at the person who was dictating to and said, what did I say? What did I say? And he said, you said the entire universe is permeated with a strong odor of turpentine. That was the answer. So many people have a vision. And although they are convinced themselves of the rightness of that vision, sometimes it's no more than television. Okay, and let me tell you what television has been defined as. Television is an invention that permits you to be entertained in your living room by people that you wouldn't have in your home. And that's so true, isn't it? With all the rubbish that passes for entertainment and the influences and control that we allow into our homes and into our lives is absolutely incredible. So the adage is rubbish in, rubbish out. And so I think we've got to start thinking about what is vision and what is television. Now, here in our text today, we've read about Jacob and his vision. Jacob is in control, or so he thought. Surely this is only a minor setback. He's got to go to his uncle Laban. Things are going to get better. I can cope because I know how to cope. And Uncle Laban's one that'll be no different from what it was like at home. I would just take it one step at a time, take it as it comes. Because he knew what he wanted out of life, you see. He knew the direction to success, and he was determined to get there. Nothing and no one was going to stand in Jacob's way. Well, right in front of us, what we have is a prime example of selfish, independent nature. The one factor in his life that Jacob had not counted on, however, was that God had a vested interest in him. It makes no difference, you see, to God how far away you think you are or how untouchable you think you are. God can reach into your being and touch you with a reality that you've never known before. And just as we've watched a little bit of Leona's story, I can tell you the first time we met Leona, there was absolutely no way that she was going to entertain Jesus or the gospel. She fought with us. Without provocation, she attacked us. And the amazing discussions that we had with them, we said, we will pray for you, Leona. And look what's happened. And recently baptized. And I mean, she's so articulate. And we think that, God's got some special plan for her there. Look at verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and he set out for Haran. And when he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and he laid down to sleep. And he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on earth with its top reaching heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. That's a lovely dream, isn't it? I don't know if you've ever had a nice dream like that, something you want to go back to all the time. I remember I once had a dream, and it was a fantastic dream. I used to dream of this It was an oilseed rape field, nice and yellow, beautiful colours. And in the middle was a small hillock, lovely and green and everything else. And then there was this tree. And I thought, oh, this is marvellous. And the best bit of all, I was laying underneath it reading a book. And I thought, it was just a great place to be, doing one of my favourite things in life. And I used to say to Mary, I had that dream again. And she said, did you? I said, oh, it was great. I hope I can go there again tonight. It was one of the places I wanted to visit. It wasn't until a few years later we went to Bible college. And on the way to Bible college, we passed an oilseed rape field. And I had to stop because in the middle of the oilseed rape field was a green hillock. And on that hillock was this tree. And it was a cedar tree. And we'd gone to Lebanon Missionary Bible College. And the symbol for the college was a cedar tree. And we were all known as students as cedars. And I remember stopping Mary and said, what's going on? I said, my dream, my dream. It was, I think it was almost as good as visiting there at night. And so started a life of reading books, which was great. A beautiful dream. And many of us have heard of Jacob's dream, of course, with this ladder, angels ascending and descending from heaven. And I'm sure that we experience a bit of confusion when we read it as well, because on the one hand, he's lying and he's cheating and he's twisting everything. And then the next minute, God is speaking to him and making all kinds of promises. But I have to tell you that this is not some kind of sweet children's story. It's not just for Sunday school. It is a picture of our God and his mercy towards sinful creatures. Folk that insist on living at odds with everyone and everything else in creation. But here are the circumstances for Jacob. He's from a dysfunctional home, a life of focus on this elusive birthright, a falling out with his brother, a distancing from his parents, a death threat, and now he is alone. The dream takes place in his life immediately after he thought that he'd made all the right moves, that he thought he'd won all of the rounds, and now he's on his own and he realizes, actually, I've lost the battle. This wasn't how he expected life was going to be, because certainly deep down, no matter how well he rationalized everything, and we all do that, no matter how many times he'd gone over it in his mind, and we all do that as well with our post-mortems, don't we? Now there's this determination for him. I'm going to get some sleep. The sun's gone down. I'm going to get some sleep. I'm going to have a fresh start in the morning. The past is the past. I'm going to move on. Sounds a bit like Slimming World, doesn't it, when you make the mistake and say, don't worry, tomorrow's another day. We all do it. And it's incredible how much we're so much like Jacob. We spend our lives trying to make something happen or trying to accomplish a certain thing. And we chase after our dreams like bubbles. And we reach out, and as we grasp it, it bursts. And so we reach out for another one and another one and another one. We spend our life running around in circles, chasing these dreams that are going to offer us nothing. There is nothing romantic about this scripture, this picture. What we have here is a sad individual who is alone because he can think of no one but himself. And in this moment, the futility of his experience is a reality. You ever been there? When everything seems futile? I was thinking of Macbeth. I don't know if you're familiar with Macbeth. And as the queen dies, in Act 5, the king says, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays are lighted falls the way to dusty death. Out, brief candle. Life is a walking shadow. It's a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then he is no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. And that kind of sums it up, doesn't it? The times when we're at that point, when we're on the precipice of our melancholy, we're not sure which way we are going to go, and we're lost. You know, for Jacob, the dream came at a moment when he least expected it, but it arrived at the moment where the balance of his life had to be redressed. Now, clearly there's something wrong with this picture. The stubbornness, the refusal to conform, the megalomania of a man who is so insecure that he doesn't know what he really wants. A man who doesn't really know who he really is. And I think that's so current. It's frightening, isn't it, in our society today? Our world is filled with folk just like this, and the Christian church is no exception. The need, the desire to be in control. The bullheadedness that has a fixation on a goal and in its tunnel vision refuses to listen or reason or share with other people. Jacob is lost. But then God intervenes. Look at verse 12. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending upon it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. And all peoples on the earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you, and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. To dream the impossible dream. We should have heard Andy Williams this morning. A stairway or a ladder going into heaven. I wonder what kind of imagery God would use today. Maybe not the same as that. But the dream means three major things. First of all, it means access to God is available to Jacob. Ordinary, sinful, twisting Jacob can know God. With God, nothing is impossible. And in the first instance, Jacob needed this perspective, as do we. God places a high value on each one of us just as we are. But he understands that just as we are is not good enough. There are aspects in all of our lives that are a shame to us. But God in his mercy and his love takes us on when no one else will. He touches us so that even the exposure of our pain, even in that, we can trust him. He's not going to broadcast our weaknesses because we do a good enough job of that ourselves. Secondly, access to God means opportunity to dialogue with God. Angels ascending and descending. Here is the proof that all along, even in the times when he's done his own thing, God has actually been there. That is mercy, isn't it? Now we can see in the most vivid way that God does care, that God does hear, that God will respond to our needs and our prayers. And later on, Jacob reflects on this and he calls it the gate to heaven. It's not the physical spot where he'd been sleeping that mattered, but the life-changing event that happened there. You know, there's an obsession today in our world with religious historical sites. I'll give you one example that you know, Bethlehem. It's a prime example. Worship is offered at the place of the supposed spot of Jesus' death, of Jesus' birth. But what is more important? Is it the place or is it the event? Well, I would favour the latter, because a building, this planet, nothing else can offer me salvation, but God can in Jesus Christ. And do you know something? When God speaks, you never forget. I can remember, and I may have told you this before, the day that I was running away from God, and the moment the pastor spoke to me and I was out of there, and as I walked down the front steps of that church, It was like walking into reality, and as I put my foot on the curb, I knew that Jesus is my Saviour, and I've not got over it yet. And I think that's when God speaks to us in those moments. He changes us, and it's really awkward because there's times when I've wanted to run away, where I've wanted to do something else, but God says, no, this is my plan. And I know that if I wander from that path, then I'm just going to be miserable. Yeah, I may have told you as well, one of our sons one time wanted to, he was a Christian, and he wanted to go out with his mates as a teenager to hang around a corner. And it wasn't a particularly good place to be. And I said, yeah, of course you can go. And he went, really? And I said, yeah, of course you can, off you go. And he said, and as he was got his coat on, he walked in that door, I said, oh, Paul, there's just one thing. I said, what? I said, did you know there's nothing more miserable than a Christian doing something he's not supposed to be doing? And he took his coat off and said, you always spoil it. Jacob would now know that he could speak to God. And more importantly, God would speak to him. And I have to ask you, has God ever spoken to you? Maybe not through an audible voice, maybe not through a dream or a vision. Maybe it's been through an answered prayer. Maybe it's been through something someone has said, and as it struck your heart, you've known the truth of it. That's God speaking to you. You see, as Christians, we often miss the point of this story here. Jacob had all the background of a godly family. Their existence was due to their knowing God. And Jacob had witnessed for himself in the context of their family history and within their home that reality. And I've got no doubt at all that his mother told him and his brother from when they were that high that they were an answer to prayer. We all do that to our kids, don't we? We all tell them about what God has done. We recount the times when God has answered a prayer, or he's gifted us with friends or family and fellowship. And we even tell them of the times that God has bailed us out on a sticky patch. Jacob knew of God, but the problem is, from a dysfunctional home, he didn't know God. He hadn't experienced him in his life, not really. He'd enjoyed all the benefits of God's blessing in the home, but he'd never actually owned that truth. You know, we could say this is actually a picture of the Christian church today. And our responsibility to remain functional, because if we're not, then as folk join us on the periphery, they come in and they will soak up the blessing, but they will become dysfunctional too, because they will think that the feel-good factor of the church community, although some might call it a mystical experience, is experiencing God, when in all it is in actual fact is a subjective experience that adds to the self-delusion that they can live and know God on their own terms. It's not about just being around God's people. It's about actually meeting God and knowing God. And there's no doubt here that God can and will meet us despite our bad examples and about the bad experiences we've had. It doesn't matter. But that does not absolve you and I as the family of God or the individual on the periphery from exercising the responsibility to seek God and to have the desire to know him better. Jacob was one of these people on the periphery. He's deeply challenged by his experience, and it set him on this road to learning, and that was going to be a really tough time for him. However, and here's the point, there had to be a marker for him. There had to be a beginning, a place he could trace his relationship to God, right, the starting point. You know, it's not so important that we remember the time and the date so much as the fact of the time when we encountered Jesus Christ in a new and living way. For some people who come from a Christian home, they can't remember a time when they didn't know Jesus, where they didn't love him. That doesn't mean they've some kind of drifted into it. It often means that they regularly have reflected on that, the importance of maintaining that relationship as they've grown in grace. For others, they've encountered God and in a dramatic experience, and still other people have come very quietly and the change in their life has been profound. There is no set pattern. But if you are truly a believer, then you will know God. And if you know God, then you cannot but help yourself wanting to commit yourself more and wanting to serve him more and more and more. That has become the priority in your life. And if you need proof of how incredible God is and what he can do, listen to this story I read this week. There was a guy who was an actor. He's called Alexander Rostoshev. He was converted, actually, while he was playing Jesus in a very sacrilegious play, and it was called Jesus in a Tuxedo. Okay, and what he was supposed to do was read a couple of verses from the Sermon on the Mount, and then he was to throw off his robes and say, "Give me my tuxedo and a top hat." Now, I haven't read the story of what that play was about, but as he started to read the lines, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted," he began to tremble. And instead of finishing the script as he was supposed to, he carried on reading the scriptures. And everyone was coughing and knocking the floor and shouting out, "Move on," giving them the next line. And he kept going and he kept going. And then he remembered a verse from his childhood from church, from the the Russian Orthodox Church. And he stood there and he said, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And when the curtain came down, he was a new man. Trusted Jesus. That is fantastic. Do you see what God did there? Sometimes we mock God. Sometimes we don't think he can work, but he can work in ways we can't even imagine. And here in the text, in the first instance, the dream showed Jacob that he could have access to God. Secondly, he's told he can now talk with God. There's this two-way relationship going on. And thirdly, it meant that God's approval was on Jacob's life. It wasn't because he deserved it in any way at all, but because of God's grace and mercy. But there's something else that's happening here. I don't know if you've picked it up at all. What about that birthright? The dream that he'd had, the thing he'd maneuvered people and circumstances to so that he could achieve his goal. Now it seems to mean nothing at all. Life has suddenly taken a whole new meaning and direction, and now he's got responsibility and purpose. "I am with you," says God. "I'll bring you back home, and I will never leave you." Now, that is a conversion experience if ever I heard one. So to dream the impossible is dream, but this is probably more important. Wake up, O sleeper. Verse 16, when Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place," and I wasn't aware of it. He was afraid and says, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is none other than Bethel." How awesome is this place? Can you say that? Do you say that every Sunday when you walk in? How awesome is this church? Huh? This is the gate of heaven. And early next morning, he took the stone he placed under his head. He set up a pillar on it and poured oil on top of it. And he called the place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. He started owning the land already, hasn't he? He's changing all the name places. And then Jacob made a vow saying, "If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I'm taking and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I've set up as a pillar will be God's house. And all that you give me, I will give a tenth." When Jacob woke up, I think he was in a state of shock, actually. God has spoken to him, and this is only ever happened to people like his mum and dad. This didn't happen to Jacob. He was aware of what he was like. He was very self-aware, actually. He knew deep down that all he deserved from God was justice. And he was probably thinking in the realms of punishment. And do you know what? This is so human, because if we're honest, we all like to think that we're a bit of a tough nut to crack, don't we? We all like to think we got that little bit of mystery about ourselves that makes us really unknowable. We like the idea of a reputation that it will take God to deal with us because no one else could cope with us. That's a bit of a joke, really, isn't it? Why do we pretend to be something that we're not? You know, our behaviour is a little bit like, have you seen these widos that go around in their fast cars? They lower the cars and they drive around with the windows and the roof open and the sound cranked up, and they put all the fog lights on, if you notice it, even in the sunshine. You know, who are they affecting? Who does it make feel good? You know, the real hard cases in life are those people who keep their counsel, who analyse every move and are always looking for an advantage. And if you're one of those, let me just tell you that God's love can reach even you. Not because you deserve it, but because he does love a difficult sinner. The message to Jacob, the message to us, is to wake up to ourselves and realise that this is God, the creator and sustainer of the universe, who is intervening into time and space and history to give us an offer that we dare not refuse. He's offering us total forgiveness from the past when we get to the end of our rope and recognise that we need help to live the way that he intended. He offers us a fresh start, the joy of being able to start with a clean slate. And the fresh start is there for every single person who's willing to believe. And God promises that he will never leave us. Jacob's immediate response to God's goodness is he gets up and he sets up this pillar and he pours oil on it. The stone that was a symbol of discomfort and suffering for him had become a symbol of hope. And he realized that there is only so far that you can go down before we must make up our minds as to whether or not we believe that God is there. And here's a note for you to think about. Whoever seeks will find. To whoever knocks, the door will be opened. Your life could be a broken heart. It could be a failed life. It could be the grit your teeth determination to make the best of a crazy life. Is it really enough? I don't think so. God is waiting to speak so that we will know his promise, and all we've got to do is listen and respond. But let me give you one word to the wise as we close today. Do you know something? You can't break God's promises by leaning on them. And we'll continue next week. Let's pray, shall we?